The recent result of the U.S. federal election and the inauguration of President Trump is such an enormous event. It is like something of a large scale seismic shock. The Earth has moved, undeniably, and the shake up and the aftershocks will be felt for years to come. One can hardly not have an opinion on what has occurred, but rather than voice a particular opinion about the candidates, the various media is full to overflowing with such opinions, it is better for the purpose of the various themes discussed in these arguments to limit the comment to why the result happened. In a way, some of the things that have been written and talked about here fit in with actual events. If you are a follower of the news and you try to be critical and minimize ideological bias, you might have predicted that big change was coming. You might not have guessed the outcomes of the U.S. federal election, but it became painfully apparent that things were being driven by fear. One candidate played the fear trump card far better than the other, and to greater effect. That is the real story, that such an individual with such a campaign took it so far, took it right to the Oval Office. It speaks volumes about where a significant portion of the American public are insofar as mindset and emotional state. Remember the question right at the start? How do you think? How do you feel? How have Americans been thinking and feeling, and what are they thinking and feeling now? It seems that people everywhere, within much of the U.S. media and those abroad watching the campaign, underestimated the mood of the American public and its vulnerability to emotional manipulation. Much is being said and will continue to be said about this election for months and years to come. At the time that work was being done on this episode, there were all kinds of speculations as to the role of social media and how things are picked up and shared or retweeted, etc. The trouble with most of modern social media is that it too often engages the emotion in short, bombastic bursts. A 7-second meme, for example. In this format, truth is irrelevant. It is about emotion. In fact, emotion is the whole thing. Within our rushed lives, with information overload and multi-vector distraction, we have difficulty maintaining focus for too long. And focus is required if we are to digest ideas and think rationally and critically. If you are a regular to this site, then you must be something of an exception to the rule. The medium that delivers this content is primarily audio, and it is a lot longer than 7 seconds, and so you must have some ability that seems to be all but endangered in the wider world. That is the ability to maintain focus. So congratulations to you. Secretly, though, it is hoped that places for thinking such as this can start to become more popular, because we need to be able to think. We now see with a couple of stark examples what can happen when we abandon reason and act on emotion coming from fear. Consider a world in a state of flux with massive change and inducements to widespread social deficit with emotionally laden media that can only amplify the underlying anxiety. And add to this a sense of loss, that the dream has failed. Is it any wonder that people have made a rash choice? It is the only thing that people do when they feel that the world that they have known is being taken away from them, especially when the people in question have a strong sense of pride. From the outside looking in, a place like Canada, for example, it is perhaps quite a bit easier to see. We must remember that America and the American way of the 20th century was victorious in the world. Outsiders in other countries that have their own pride have often begrudged this of Americans. And while it is important to be critical, it is also important to recognize that America has been an enormous force for maintaining global stability. It is only an academic thought experiment to imagine how it might have come out if America had not been leading and had not been victorious, but in every version of possible outcomes within the 20th century, things would have been less stable, less democratic, and perhaps it would have been quite ugly. Imagine, for instance, if the Nazis had won the Second World War. It is a big reason why we pause to remember the sacrifice of our vets on November 11th each year. We owe them a life lived with the freedoms we take for granted, and the Americans made the decisive blow with their might, securing the Allied forces' victory 70 years ago. That was a legacy that was. It was the idea that America was the country of the world. They were the victors. They were the most powerful economically and militarily, and they often led by example with democracy and morality. The critic might say, hold on a minute, because America did not always live up to its high-minded ideals. Over time, however, and with some hard-fought battles, it seemed that America eventually did more right than wrong. But then, for many Americans, there was the feeling that their best days were behind them, and so they bought into the idea of making America great again. This turned out to be an idea of division, because for many people, actually pretty much half of the population that was of non-white racial background, America was only just starting to become great. For the non-white half of the population, gains towards equality have been only a recent and ongoing development. For the white portion of the population that supported Donald Trump, however, there was the feeling of losing ground as others were gaining and becoming equal. There is an ugly narrative here that many commentators were not seeing fully, perhaps because they didn't want to believe it. We, and this includes yours truly, wanted to believe that the majority of Americans would be more noble and choose to reject the play to the negative and to the fear. We wanted to believe that America had matured and left behind the divisiveness of its youth and adolescence. And perhaps we were not looking closely enough either. Whenever we grew tired of the drawn-out drama of the American election reality show, we would always just change the channel to find some other suitable distraction so that we could prop up our all-important happiness. For we prefer not to look at ugliness for too long, because it can suck the happiness right out of you. It is a fragile happiness that cannot look at the truth of things. And the truth of things that is now laid bare is that America has been moving towards this divisiveness for some time. The core support for Trump is, of course, mostly white, but they are not all working-class people that have fallen on hard times and fallen out of the middle class. Many of the core supporters for the Trump campaign came from the upper middle class, and these have been doing quite well, at least monetarily. What has really been going down, and what came to a head in a decisive way on November 8th, was a reaction to massive change. So many forces of change have been acting upon people and have been transforming our lives that in some significant way, the natural reaction is fear. But people that have pride do not easily admit or even recognize that fear is driving them. They will, however, express anger, which is close kindred to fear in the emotion family. It is one thing to become enveloped by fear when the world is changing around you so much that you don't recognize your country anymore. It is another thing when you are uncertain as how to make any sense of it. Information can come at you from all directions in this age, so much so that we experience information overload, a process that was prophesied by Alvin Toffler back in 1970, with his seminal work, Future Shock. When we are bombarded with information and when we are being influenced by fear, we tend to select only that which confirms our beliefs for us. This is a phenomenon known as confirmation bias. The phenomenon becomes more pronounced with charged emotion, like fear and anger, and it may play out in ways that we do not see because it has got a hold of us too. Consider some of the forces of change that have been having impact everywhere and all at once in the modern world. Some of these things have been pointed out by various populist movements. The effects of globalization on the security of work, or the elimination of many jobs by advanced robotics. The digitization of everything and how it is nearly impossible to keep up with it all. How about the destructive forces that appear to be bearing down on us like an approaching tsunami? We cannot deny that disasters of every kind unnerve us, and we feel the effects of fear every time there is some new disease. And of course, there is the fear of all of those people from failed states that want to come to sanctuary in countries that still have security. They want to come here. And what will it do to our security if we let them in? And so, we want to protect that bit of security that we still have. We want to wall ourselves off and go back to a time when things were good. We want it to be great again. The confirmation bias plays out amongst those that are experiencing uncertainty and fear, and they react by wanting to wall themselves off. The confirmation bias plays out amongst those that don't want to look at the ugliness. They don't want to believe that their happiness may be in jeopardy. Their response is to wall themselves off in a different way and use all manner of distraction in an effort to maintain a desperate happiness. The sum of all this confirmation bias is that you get the result that was November 8th. The result that you get is a country that is polarized in a way that it has not been for over 150 years. That seems like an extreme statement, but look at the voting patterns. Trump won on the white vote. Clinton got the bulk of the minorities and a small portion of the overall white vote. You could not cleave the country so precisely if you made it to order, and that sets the table for potentially terrifying reality. In the eyes of the American public, just over half of the population, judging by the popular vote numbers, must feel that Trump's presidency is illegitimate and not deserving of respect. If the election had gone the other way, then nearly half the country would have felt the same about Clinton. It makes one think of the phrase, damned if you do, damned if you don't. A nation that is so divided and so primed with fear and anger is like a volatile ticking time bomb that might explode early if there is an accidental vibration that can set the thing off. We might want to look the other way when we encounter this dark reality of anger and polarization. We might want to go back to our various distractions and the pursuit of our own happiness. To do so, and to ignore this reality, is to ensure that it will come apart violently. The stage is set. Will we find our strength to head off that which seems inevitable? For those that care and are aware, there is a sense of urgency. There is a clear and present danger of a world on edge, and a need for rational thought that can diffuse rash emotion. There is a need to believe in something that can rally us, something that can snap us out of our bad moods and our sense of dread and foreboding. It is said that death and taxes are inevitable. Living life for real with a heart tuned towards the good is a thing that must be chosen by character of strength. Character of strength defies inevitability. It does so because it believes in itself. It says, to hell with hell. We can do better. Hello again. It is Sunday, February 5th, 2017, as I record this postscript to episode 6. In the case of this episode and this postscript, I feel that disclosure of the time that I did the writing and the thinking is important because of the social/emotional state resulting from real-world events and how they may impact what I have said and will say. Most of the script for episode 6 was written in late November and periodically through the month of December. I came back to it with only minor alterations around the time of the presidential inauguration in the United States. The previous 5 episodes were all written and revised through the summer and the fall of 2016, and they developed with a sort of natural flow of ideas, and so I made the recordings and released them at intervals of a week or so between them. I then came back to episode 6 recently and polished it. In many ways, it seems in hindsight, that I was predicting upheaval because the forces of massive change and the reaction to them, with a mix of fear and pride, suggested to me that we would soon begin to experience some big consequences. The US election was just such a consequence, and the ripple effects have hit home hard. For even in Canada now, we have witnessed the terrible ugliness that has manifested as a murder shooting took place at a Quebec mosque on the night of January 29th. The horror of such an event is shocking, to say the least. If we, even in polite and quiet Canada, ever felt we were immune to the insanities of the world, then this has surely shocked us out of our complacency. My thought is that I, and others like me, must argue loudly for the reasoned approach to life that can cut through this rash display of fear and hatred. It is a show of character of strength to be able to recognize what is happening around us, to be able to say, enough, this must stop. We should know that we could do better if we were to listen to our hearts. What sort of world do you want? What sort of world do you want for your children? It is a question I ask myself, and so I cannot sit in idle silence and simply enjoy the many indulgences that life has to offer in what used to be this polite and quiet Canada. Expect to hear more from me soon. Bye-bye.